Christ my Savior and my God, with Christ my Savior and my God. Amen. Would you please be seated?
I was down talking to Taylor, and I'm like, oh, God. There's music going on, and it's coming to an end. I was very thankful I made it in time. Well, good morning, whatever. I am so tired. Good evening. Thank you for coming, and it truly is a blessing for me to see you guys, especially when I know so much sickness has been going on. We're going to pick up from where we left off, and I want to give a couple of clarifications. One of my probably bigger weaknesses as a teacher and pastor is I assume that if I preached on something, you guys all remember it, even if you weren't even here for it. And so I'm not saying this is a good quality in me, but it's a quality in me. And so I store up in my brain to one degree or another about 2,500 sermons I preached, and it's like, well, so these things. And so I make sometimes some jumps that in my brain make absolute sense and everyone else is wondering what. I also assume that you're able to fill in exception clauses to various things that I may say. And then I realized later on that, well, maybe they didn't understand that. And that's the case here. When we were looking at the idea of the first three chapters of Genesis, we dealt with the first two. We saw that man is made in the image, both male and female, and that humanity, all of humans, bear that image, which makes them incredibly precious. We talked about then the creation mandate, where he said that they are to be fruitful and multiply, right? And so in that, I asked you, so what does that mean? It means make babies. And then what else? A lot of babies. Then I talked about the idea of, look, you should be wanting that. You should not see that as a hindrance. There are always exceptions to those things. And that's something that you should understand. Sometimes they're just physical inability. God has not given a male or a female that ability to procreate. It's not that they knew it or desired it, but it is the way it is. But also sometimes it just due to your age that you get married later on in life, it just makes some of those things unsafe. We have 4 children. Our oldest was the last to marry. And they've had their children, and they've stopped, but there was a point where there was even concern there. It's like at some point you put yourself at risk, and so what I'm trying to say in this inadequate way is don't think that this is an all or nothing type of situation. I have friends who have. The wife had Huntington's chorea, I believe is the way to describe it. Have you guys heard it? Huntington's disease. If you ever want proof that the fall came, learn about that disease. His name is Dr. John Feinberg. Some of you guys know him and know what I'm talking about. His wife has it, and it's genetically passed down. And her mother had it, and back then you didn't talk about those things. All they know is mom was a little different, then she just went away one day. And that was all they knew. And then she developed it. And it is an absolutely, totally debilitating disease that you end in death, but prior to that you go insane. And in the process, you lose absolute full ability over your body. And so whoever doesn't have it watches their loved one just descend into this. And they didn't know that. They didn't know she carried that gene. They had children, and half of them have it. And it created an incredible rift, of course, in the family when 2 of the children found out that they're watching mom, and they're now watching this thing go down. And so because it's carried on, the other 2 have to make decisions. It's basically a 50-50 kind of chance. And so keep that in mind, that in everything I'm saying, Sin has a way of causing problems in all that, right? And things are not as clean as we wish they were, but you want to go for the general direction on things like this, that the command is be fruitful and multiply. So you should not be afraid of having children. You should not be hating children or being turned away or turned off by children. But at the same time, there are other extenuating circumstances that comes into play. I hope that makes some sense. Now, we learned that men are to leave and take a wife. This is out of Genesis 2:24, where for this reason a man shall leave his mother and father and cleave to his wife. And all of that talks about the idea of raising children differently. And so I know some of this is repeat, but I want to get us kind of built back up. What that means is that for those of you who have sons and daughters, you should be thinking about them very differently from day one. Just start thinking about how you comport yourself around them, how your wife or husband comports himself. What's the strategy? What are you trying to develop? Because you can end up developing a caricature of a female or a caricature of a male, but you need to train men to be men. And so one of the things that husbands, where husbands come into play is when a wife has a son, she will spend a lot of her time puzzled, okay? She's just going to be puzzled over him because he just does things, and things that you and I as men, I'm talking to the guys here, we all kind of like, yeah, so, who doesn't burp the whole ABCs? I mean, that's pretty impressive. I was joking with a mother after service because her son had the only thing hitting the chair that he was sitting on was his neck. Everything else was off the chair, and I'm like, boy really understands his sitting skills. She's like, this is how he is all the time. I said, that's okay. My grandson, his rear end is on the school chair about 1/4 of an inch. The rest of his body is off the seat. And then he falls down and looks shocked over it. And she's like, my sons do this all the time. I'm like, that's boys. That's sitting. And she's like, I don't understand. I said, that's okay. That's because you're a girl. And so just keep those in mind, that there is those differences. I highly encourage you to buy a book called Future Men, if you have young men, and read it. But then begin to apply it, and then read it again and find out how much you've forgotten, how much you passed over. Men are built different. You want them to take risks. And so you're going to have to accept the fact that they're going to hurt themselves. They're going to scrape themselves. They're going to break bones. They're going to do things that will you'll be like, what were you thinking? And you don't want to stifle those things, but you do want to shepherd them. And so keep those things in mind. For one of the things that we would train our son and our daughters on is you can never mock your brother, because it was usually the girls against my poor son, because he had 4 mothers, right? He had his real mother and then 3 that really thought they were his mother, and they weren't. And I would constantly remind him, knock it off. You're not his mother. And then he being a boy then stands up, yeah. I'm like, and you, stop it. Pop him on the head, and he's like, whoa. This is just how children are. But daughters cannot make fun of their brother for being a boy. But boys can't make fun of girls for being a girl. That's to be honored. So when your daughter is playing also gently and he comes zooming in like a dive bomber and kicks the doll across the room and charges off, with his sword, and you're like, what just happened? You don't praise him for that. You're like, dude, come back here. Go get the doll. Go seek your sister's forgiveness. Come on. Well, I was just playing. I know you were playing, but she was playing too, and you're not playing the same way. In the same way, when a daughter or a son enters into the other's domain, that's their problem. Rules are, if Maddie came in and the girls were playing house and he made the sad mistake, can I play with you? he would then immediately try to upset the house play. And I'm like, no, no, no. You wanted to play with the girls. Have fun. Dad, this is not fun. This is boring. I'm like, I could have told you that. What were you thinking? They're playing with dolls, guy. Come on. Oh, and it's like, nope. No, you're in their domain. Same thing. Girls, you want to come in and have a wrestling match with the brother? Prepare to cry. Just prepare to cry. You're going to hurt. Why? They're boys. I think I've told this story many times, but my poor son, we had the Ruglowskis. I don't even know where they're at anymore, but they were friends of ours in seminary. 4 boys. And they were rough and tumble. They were boys. I mean, they were fun to hang around. And they had to go do something. They wanted us to babysit. And Kim's like, is it okay if the Ruglowskis do that? I'm like, yeah. I said, Maddie's going to get his rear end kicked. And Kim's a mom. She stands up and she's like, he will not. He's a tough boy. I said, girl, he is not a tough boy. He is a boy with 3 sisters. And she's like, and they fight hard, says the girl. And she all I did was get her more and more mad at me because she kept defending him. I'm like, there is no defense here. There is no defense. He will lose. He will lose. He will be constantly at the bottom of the pile. I said, and mind you, he'll love it. And so they came over. I went to work. I come home. They're gone. And Maddie is just looking tired but happy. And I said, hey, babe, how'd it go? She's like, oh, it was great. And I said, how'd Maddie do? You're right. He was never once, even in the middle of the pile. He was always on the bottom. I said, I told you. I said, they're rough. I said, please tell me you didn't stop them. Please. I wanted them over to toughen them up. And she's like, well, I did stop a little bit. That's just what I'm trying to get at, is that they're different. And a man is to take risks. And if you create in them this inability to do that, they will eventually either go one way, become very effeminate, which is horrible, or they will turn that inability to do risk into extreme risk, and they'll do things that are just foolish. But they are young men, and they're built a certain way. And so then when you're asking them, hey, go leave and go find a wife, they're not doing it because you've created in them a passive heart, and you don't want that. You want a son to be bold. And that doesn't all look the same way. I have a brother-in-law who is an exceedingly gifted landscaper and florist. Never in my mind would I ever have thought that a man could be a florist. And he even carries some effeminate kind of qualities, what you would typically call. But he is thoroughly a man, in every way, shape, or form. And I remember at first I got to know Brian, and he was one of my sisters. Well, I have 2 sisters. Her husband, they got married very, very young. And I'm like, he's not, I don't know. But I was also a little brother. What do I know? And that as I began to watch him, and I realized he was a man of honor. He was a man who took bold a risk. He started multiple businesses, made them all successful. He also faithfully and cared for and continues to love my sister. He's a man of strength. He's a man who loves sports, but different kinds of sports. Not that I like karate, and he liked bike riding, which I didn't consider a sport until I did it. What I'm trying to say is don't also pigeonhole them into all looking a certain way. I got to know a little bit a guy named Jubilant Sykes, who is a well-known baritone opera singer, is a Christian. And he, too, carries different kind of characteristics, but it's part of what he's built for. But he is just an incredibly gifted guy. Just realize that you, as a man, the point that you want to be doing is learning to take risks and taking the lead and being decisive. How that will flesh itself out might look different in different situations, but the worst thing you can do is be afraid, risk adverse. And you're always backing up, and you're cautious to the point that you can't move forward because you got a wife who needs you to move forward, needs you to make decisions, and you'll frustrate her no end. All of that I said was that a man is to leave the father's house And so the parents should be encouraging that. That doesn't mean you get them out on their 18th birthday, but it also doesn't mean that you just leave it an open-ended thing. Go over to Ephesians 5. You know this passage, most of you already. Ephesians 5:22. Wives, be subject to your own husbands as to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ also is the head of the church, he himself being the Savior of the body. But as the church is subject to Christ, so also the wife ought to be to their husbands in what? In everything. Okay, and this comes into courtship real big, okay? That a wife is to be in subjection to her husband in everything. There's not some part that she gets to say, well, this is mine. Husbands, command here, love your wives. How? Just as Christ also loved the church and gave himself up for her. Why did he do that? So that he might sanctify her, make her holy, set her apart, having cleansed her by the washing of water with the word, that he might present to himself the church in all her glory, having no spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that she should be or would be holy and blameless. So husbands ought to love their own wives as their own bodies. He who loves his own wife loves himself. For no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as Christ also does the church, because we are members of his body. For this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. This mystery is great, but I'm speaking with reference to Christ and the church. Nevertheless, each individual among you also is to love his own wife, even as himself. And the wife must see to it that she respects her husband. Now, this is the passage almost always I'll take couples through in detail and then supplement with some other passages. But this is the best and fullest sense of the duties of husband and wife. Now, with this, go all the way back to 5:18. It says, and do not get drunk with wine, for that is dissipation or debauchery, depending on your translation, but be filled with the Spirit. Now, this filling is not that unique empowerment I talked about this morning, where all of a sudden you burst out in prophetic word or some miraculous power. This is that submission, that ongoing submission to the Holy Spirit, and the way you do that is through his word, all right? And so he is contrasting two different controlling influences. You see, there's the influence of that being controlled by wine. And so, but it's not just wine. It's like, okay, so I'll have whiskey then. No, you're missing the point. This is a controlling influence, or this is going to control. And that's the issue, is which one controls you. One will lead into debauchery, dissipation, basically a wasted life. And the other one produces something else. What is it? It's everything that is talked about from verse 19 all the way down to chapter 6, verse 9. Those are what it looks like to be filled with the Spirit. And if you get that, it changes how you think about that. It means then that when we're singing to one another in psalms and hymns, that is a walking and being filled with the Spirit. When we are subject to one another and giving thanks for all things, that's a mark of being filled with the Spirit. And so the wives, how do they manifest that? One of the ways is by showing that submission to their husband. Husbands, though, they're not called to submit to their wife. Instead, they're called to love their wife. The wife, she's called to respect her husband. The children, obey their parents. The parents, specifically the father, you're to care for and raise up your son. Don't provoke them to anger. Slaves, on and on and on. So all of this is very, very important that you get that God has given both the male and the female, and here, husband and wife, you've given them different duties. And so here's a question that I have. If you ever talk to people, and you'll know that they were premarital counseled by me, because they will invariably ask you this question. There's only one man in all the world, if as a young lady, there's only one man in all the world outside of your father that you are to submit to, and that will be your husband. No other man created do you need to submit to but your husband. And so I want you to ask yourself, can you follow that man? And I ask every single young lady in my office with their dear, darling husband, or not husband, but boyfriend next to them. And I say, can you follow him? And are you modeling that right now? And it's about that time that they're starting to look a little, well, we just had an argument on the way over here. Why? Well, because, and then I look at the man. There is only one woman that you're going to love. That's Christ loved the church. In all of the universe, only one. And can you do that with this one? Because that's what you're signing up for. It's this absolute faithfulness to this covenant promise that she is the one I am to guide, protect, cherish, love in every way, shape, or form. And if you're honest, a lot of times, no, you don't. The guy drives you nuts, and what you're trying to do is change him. And it's like, then stop. Get out of this relationship now. I have had enough conversations with enough couples prior to marriage where I told them, I'm like, you have no choice. You either marry them now because you guys are rapidly in sin, or you break up. But this can't continue. You can't be in this middle ground. The only thing good coming out, or only thing being produced out of this, is sin. And so you look at this and you realize that this is the calling. So I have to raise my daughters to be, if they're going to learn how to be subject to their own husbands, what do I need them to learn from me? Okay, go ahead and try. I mean, if you're wrong, you're wrong, but what? Yeah, well, I need to teach them to then be subject to me, right? Which is the obedience. But yeah, they need to be able to follow me. And so when the father checks out of the household, which way too many fathers do, you've just set your poor daughters up to fail. Why would you do that? You know, why? Man up. Your daughters, every time they're afraid, they should instinctively be looking for dad because dad's safe. I'm teaching a couple how to, some of the most basic things about like just disciplining. And I said, when you discipline, I said, what do you do? And they're like, well, we spank. I'm like, okay, but how do you do that? And with their hand, I said, stop that. I gave them some whackers I make. That's what I call them. And I said, use this. I said, so that when the child thinks of your hand, they'll think of it as simply the thing that God holds them and hugs them and comforts them and calms them. I said, the father, your daughter needs to see you that way. And so you've got to be fathers from day one. You're training your children to attend themselves to your ears. And if you tolerate them talking back and you tolerate them arguing and fighting and resisting, you're setting up some poor husband someday to have to deal with that. Does that make sense? And that poor guy didn't ask for that, even though he might deserve it. That's a separate issue. But you want to be able to hand a young lady that was given to you by God, and you prepared her to know what respect looks like and how to respect a husband, because they've been taught what respect looks like toward you. And you've taught them what it looks like to follow and look to you for leadership. In the same way, you're flipping that around, and you're like, well, I'm going to make a man's man. Great, but make certain that, more importantly, is that he knows how to love his wife. That's hard work, isn't it, guys? Because all of us are bad at it. And we're always learning and growing and repenting on what does it look like to love a wife, especially when the wife decides she wants to fight. Not that any of you would do that, ladies. But some marriages, there's a time where the wife will dig in her heel. And the guy's forced to, how's he going to deal with that? Is he going to pop her upside the head? Is that what it does? That's not an option. Does he give in? Happy wife, happy life, whatever? That's not wise. How do you handle that? How do you guide your wife in the midst of tension and difficulty? And so the only way that poor girl will know what a godly man looks like is if you're godly. But the only way your son will know what a godly husband looks like is if you model it from day one. And it's hard. It's really, really hard. But if you want to get courtship right, if you're thinking that you've got a 16-year-old, 17-year-old daughter, and you're going to tell her you're going to court, and you have not been there for her for the first 17 years of life, technically she's to obey you, but you've lost. You've already lost because you checked out. You checked out of your God-given role as dad. And so if you didn't know it, you all will marry somebody oftentimes very similar to your own parents. Guys will marry their mother. Kind of weird, huh? No, I won't. Yeah, you will. And not always. And the same thing for the guy. And a lot of times the reason for it is that's the only woman they know. That's the only man they really know. And so for some of you, you're like, I don't like how I was raised by my dad. I didn't like what my father taught me to be as a man, or my dad wasn't even there. Then that means that you say, now things change. It has to. I'm going to, by God's grace, I'm going to study this, think about this, and start to put this into application now so that my son has a model that was better than what I had. And for some people, that's nothing. Or as a daughter, that when she looks back, you can make her be so good at house cleaning, but never have a quiet and gentle spirit because you didn't model a quiet and gentle spirit, which is what 1 Peter says is precious in the sight of the Lord. Does that make sense? We can get caught in you can make them learn how to start a fire. You can teach them how to load a gun. You can show them how to, I don't know what that's called, field dress a deer, I think is the proper term. Or tie the different knots for the fishing, or drive really fast, or whatever it is. How about you teach your son first what it looks like to provide and work hard and protect and guard your family and instruct them in a way of righteousness. How about you teach them what it looks like when there's a threat, no matter how silly it is, and you step into the front to protect them. This is what's involved in courtship. So it's a lot more than just this little, we do this and then we jump through those hoops, okay? Go over to Colossians 3. (3:18). Again, we see husbands, be subject to your husbands as fitting in the Lord. Now here, we have just one other thing that you need to do. Husbands, love your wives. And then the command, do not be what? Embittered against them. So we don't have to talk about the ladies here. We'll talk about the guy because this is a common problem, which is why we have man caves. Something to get away from them. We don't want to be around them. We want to avoid them. We don't want to have to talk. And so we become an expert on tinkering in the garage or building a new project. In fact, you go crazy if you don't have a project because the one thing you don't want to do is spend time with your wife because you're bitter. Because things aren't the way they ought to be or they are not perfect. And you can't do that. You just can't do it at all. And so one of the simplest ways, men, that you can help your son is to show that when he becomes bitter toward the sisters, that you recognize that's a bad thing. And you're going to get him off to the side and talk him through that and help him think through. You're going to show him what it looks like when you go with meekness to your wife and seek her forgiveness because you let things get out of control. Because you are going to lead the home. In all of this, the one thing you have to learn, and this is basic premarital, is that the husband cannot help but lead. You are simply the leader. And so in all ways, you are always leading. You're either doing well or you're doing poorly, but you lead. And so you have to take this by both hands and go for it. And yes, you'll fail, and yes, there'll be inadequacies, but hopefully what you can do is hand your son over or your daughters over. Well, you don't hand your son anything over. You just kick him out and say, good luck, bro. I'm here. I'll pray with you. I'll talk to you through the whole process of chasing down that girl, but it's on you. But with the girl, you're going to be handing her over. And you're going to hopefully be able to say, my daughter, my son, they're so much further along than where I was, and I'm thankful for it. Then go over to 1 Peter. I already referenced it, but 1 Peter. So this is all groundwork that you're doing because when you get married, all things being equal, you make babies, right? And all of a sudden you have a little one in your hands, and now you're caught up in that, and now you're on Instagram, and you're decorating the room, and you're looking up about gentle parenting or whatever is the latest fad of the day, and you're trying all these things, and next thing you know, you got a 5-year-old, and you're not sure how that happened. How'd you get a 5-year-old? And then they're 12, and they're hitting puberty, and you're like, how'd I get here? And you haven't figured things out. So you have to start right away. And if you didn't, you have to do some repenting and then growing up really, really fast. But he says in verse 1, in the same way, you wives, be subject to your own husbands. Notice, he actually, in the Greek, the word own is there. They take pains to make certain that a woman knows that there's only one guy she has to submit to. One of the bad things within the kind of the so-called Christian patriarchy movement is this kind of idea that the women are to be in this state of submission to like all males, especially their husband. That's bogus. In every way, there's only one man, your husband. So marry well, but once you're married, that's the one. And when you find some guy trying to assert themselves, you can stand up for yourself until your husband shows up and he should take over, and men take over. I mean, I've had some words over the years here where somebody starts to lecture my wife and I overhear it and step up and I'm like, I'm sorry. And I'll literally step in front of my wife and push her behind me and say, hi, I'm sorry, is there something going on? Oh, I got this. No, you don't have it. That's the problem. So let's just talk. Why don't we come in my office, and that goes downhill from there. But it's your own husband. So he says, subject to your own husbands, so that if any of them are disobedient to the word, so an unfaithful husband, a non-Christian husband, they may be won without a word by the conduct of the wives, as they observe what? Your pure conduct with fear. Your adornment must not be merely external, braiding the hair, the wearing of gold jewelry, or putting on a garment. It's not that those things would be wrong, but the amount of time and energy spent in the exterior without putting on the hidden things of the heart is of no value in the long run. He says, but let it be the hidden person of the heart with the incorruptible quality of a lowly and quiet spirit, which is precious in the sight of God. And then he explains, for in this way in former times the holy women also who hoped in God used to adorn themselves, being subject to their own husbands, just as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord. That was fun when I told my wife, I think you should do that. She's like, fat chance. I'm like, you could try. She's like, bucko, it's not happening. Having said that, she doesn't call me Lord, but she certainly expresses that. But calling him Lord, you become her children if you do good. And then he says, not fearing any intimidation. And what he's talking about there is When a woman who's in a difficult marriage or a young Christian starts to learn these things, and she's coming out of a non-Christian worldview, the first thing that fills her mind is the what ifs almost always, and they're filled with fear. But what if he doesn't do this? What if he does this? And you're driven by fear, and he's like, stop. You can't allow fear to be the motivating factor, whether you're going to submit or not. You have to have this heart where you look to your husband, you show him that proper honor, and you submit. Then, he says, you husbands, in the same way, you live with your wives in an understanding way, as with a weaker vessel. Not an inadequate vessel, not an insufficient vessel, but a weaker. It's, as one guy said, it's a difference between a tin cup and a china cup. One is useful in the campground, the other one you treat with care and you protect. As a weaker vessel, since she is a woman, and show her honor as a fellow heir of the grace of life, so that your prayers will not be hindered. And so again, husbands, you have to learn to treat your wife honorably. You have to grant her that. You can't treat her as like a lower level person, somehow slightly less in the kingdom of God. You exalt her, you praise her, you thank her, you show her that honor. And when you do that, you make certain that your son does too. Again, I told you, I think it was last week, that the one thing, there's a few things that would really get me, but the thing would have me out of my chair as fast as possible is if Maddie, the girls I wouldn't do this to, but Maddie was a boy, and grab him by the front of his shirt and push him against a wall and say, what? Now, it didn't happen very often. In fact, I think 3 times. But it's like, oh, apparently Dad and you need to be reintroduced to how things work. That's your mom. You show her honor. Now, Mom would be there. And I'm like, we're fine. Nobody's hurt here. But he is learning something. Just kind of like when a dog, right? Another dog gets in the way and he grabs him by the neck and kind of shoves him down. That's what you're doing. You don't have to do that. That was what I did. But behind that was not just me trying to be some tough guy. It was, you will honor her. She is your mother. You will always. You know what Matt is probably most best in? He shows so much honor to his mother now. Incredible. It's kind of disgusting as from the dad's perspective. You know, but he'll actually go over there just to spend time with Mom. And it just makes Mom's day, Kim's day. I'll come home and she'll be just beaming. And I'm like, hi. She's like, hi. I'm like, you have a good day? She's like, I had the best day, Maddie. He came over and he just spent some time after he dropped the kids off. Oh, that's nice. And she just wanted to talk to him and just see. And then he gives her a hug. And if he sees her doing something, he carries it in for her. And he is just so careful to show that kindness and gentleness to his mom. And that's something you train him in. Does that make sense? So that I tell young ladies, watch the guy and listen when he's unguarded about how he talks about his parents, especially his mom. And then watch how he is around his mother. I don't care if she's Christian or not. And ask yourself if you want to be treated the same way, because that's exactly how he'll treat you once he's got you. He'll do all kinds of amazing things to get you. But once he's got you, all of that ends. So keep that in mind, young men. If you treat your mom with disrespect and casualness, and you don't show her the honor due her, that you're creating a situation where a young lady will look at you and say, I'm not so sure. But most definitely, her father, if they go through a courtship model, he'll look at you and say, yeah, no, you can go away. True story. I literally had to get in front of a guy's face who was pursuing one of my daughters, and I told him no. And then I told him no a second time, and then I told him a no a third time after my daughter came to me in tears and says, Dad, I had to run away from him. He just keeps coming up to me anyhow. And I called him into my office. He was 17. And I told him, I said, you cannot and you will not ever address my daughter. Do you understand that? You don't even get to say hi to her anymore. You've lost that privilege. And he mouthed off to me, and we stood up, and I said, if you speak or touch my daughter in any way, shape, or form, I will break your jaw. And remember, I had just come down from being a cop. I was literally about an inch from his face in the church office down the hall. And I said, I'll break your jaw. And I said, and I'll get arrested, and I will happily go to jail, and you will have a broken jaw, but you will stay away from my daughter. Do you understand me? And finally, he believed me. All right, that's how, so if you're like, how far do you take it? I don't know. That's how far I was willing to go. That was my daughter. And she had to be safe. She had to be protected. Does that make sense? And so you're doing that. It's a lot easier when everybody in the church, to one degree or another, is all moving that direction, right? Then you don't usually have that challenge. But when you have a diverse of ideas on how you should do it, that's what happens. So with the man, you want to work on helping your son see you model that, as that you show her understanding, that you don't tell her she's got to be tough like you, but that she's allowed to have her things. She's allowed to pursue the things of beauty or the things that make her heart happy, because she's a woman. And you don't understand it, and you don't know why we have to have curtains, and you certainly don't know why we have to have those curtains, but you put the curtains up. Why? Because she's your wife, and you honor her, and you love her, even though you still think they're dumb. Don't ask me about curtains. I really do think they're a waste of money and time. But I do think, women, you would go well for your husband if you limited the bed to having just the bed's pillows. I am throwing that one out for just your husband's sake. If he has to toss off 10 pillows just so he can get into his own bed, there's sin. I'm just saying that. I don't have a Bible verse for it, but help the poor guy. Come on. Do you guys know what I'm talking about? You go to any bed and breakfasts, and the first thing you're doing is just sweeping everything off. No, that's wrong. All right. Now, go back to Genesis 3. And here's where the complexity comes in. Genesis 3 is where the sin comes into the world, right? God had said that you can't eat of this tree. And the serpent tempts and deceives Eve into eating it. And the way he did it was by, first of all, teaching her something that wasn't true, questioning whether God really said something, and then showing her what she was missing, getting her to doubt the goodness of God. And she began to look at the tree rather than God, and she looks and says, it is desirable to make one wise. And so she took and ate it, and then she gave to her husband, and he ate. It's not clear whether he was there during that. If he was, then shame on him that he didn't step in. I don't think he was. But that he then came, but he knew what had happened because she's got the fruit, and he had that choice of following his wife or the Lord, and he chose his wife. And from there, the sin came into the world, right? And so keep that in mind. And so in verses 17 to 19, I talked about this again, I know, but I'm trying to get us all driven into our mind, is that he has given certain burdens regarding the provision for his family. And that labor is always now going to be hard, and things will break, and he's going to only supply the food through this labor. And for the woman, it's that she will struggle now. The command is be fruitful and multiply, but now babies are going to die, right? And some people are going to be barren, and some will be born, and they're going to carry all sorts of deformities of some type or inadequacies. And everything just changes now. And then the worst of it is that the wife will have a desire for her husband, but he will rule over her, meaning that's not a good thing. That means that she's going to want to rule over him, and he will push back. What the Christian marriage does is begin to change that around. The wife will willingly choose to submit rather than try to rule. And the husband, instead of dominating her, which is how a non-Christian marriage oftentimes ends up, instead what will happen is that he will begin to lovingly, carefully provide for her and care for her and lead her. And so that's what's going on in all of that. Now, all of that makes, though, relationships not easy. So where does the parents, so now we can start to talk about courtship, and we only have a few minutes, but we'll start here. Somebody who's willing to say with a loud voice, I'd like to hear from like 2 or 3 people, what do you think of when you hear, especially one of you who are younger, the word courtship? Loud. Louder. Okay, that's it? Do you have a process involved? No? Okay. Lena? Oh, Seven. Isn't that not a great show? Seven, and I heard it was based off of something deep. Huh? Yeah, okay. I'm like, I didn't know that. Anybody else? Well, that's not fair. You married my daughter. Okay, you're right, though. Anybody have some, like, yeah, this is, I picture a guy and a girl on a porch, and they're swinging, and they're just talking, and she's kind of got those puffy peasant sleeves and her little gingham dress. Yes? Any of you got that kind of in your mind? Just tell me. It's not like, are you saying yes? All right, yeah. A lot of girls think that. Guys kind of in overalls, maybe with a little straw, kicking with barefoot as they're coming up there. Or others will think of the dad, and he's sitting out there polishing his shotgun on the porch while you're courting. Have you ever heard of bundling boards? How many have ever heard of bundling boards? Just a few. So in the old days in courtship, when it was wintertime, you'd go over to be courting your girl, and what they would put is they put a board in the bed, and then you would both get on opposite sides of the board, and they bundle you up, and that's called the bundling board, and that gave an opportunity for you to get to know her, but also stay warm. You know, so some people, it works. They're like, we're going to keep you guys pure, but at the same time, we don't want to freeze you. So some guy came up with it, and that's how it worked. And so there's all kinds of ideas. Here's the idea that most people see is in dating, you have 2 people, and they want to go out and do things, get to know each other, go have fun, whatever. But it's just 2 people doing something on their own. For many, courtship is doing the same thing. You just happen to add the dad for the girl into it. And that's not courtship. That's not what courtship is. A lot of guys think they've practiced courtship because they tell their daughter, you tell him to come to me first, young lady. Okay, Dad. And you come, and he tries to act all whatever because he doesn't know what he's doing. He hasn't thought about it. And all right, well, you guys can go have a movie and you have fun and be back by 9:30. You know, okay, Dad, love you, and off they go on their date. That's not what courtship is, and I want to start to develop it. The devil in courtship, the devil is in the details, and so if you're going to try to figure out the how, you'll fail. But if you grasp the why, and I've already laid a lot of it, of raising up a son that understands a woman. Here's one of the things I said to my son every time he did something wrong to his sisters. The thing that I pressed on him is, your job as a man is to protect the woman. And you didn't, buddy. You exploited her. You exploited her weakness. You teased her. You mocked her. You don't have that. That's not what a man does. A man guards a woman. Does that make sense? That's what a man is made for. And he is happiest and best when he is doing that. And so when a young boy does that, and the sisters mock him for it, then they get in trouble. So a lot of times there's just the give and take of what goes on in a family, and the father is just too lazy to do anything. He just lets it flow. No, you step in and you're guiding it, and you expect your wife to step into it when you're gone and to guide those things. And so my wife would tell Maddie, and we really put the pressure on Maddie because he was going to be the one looking, is, look, sweetie, I need you to be strong. And so I want you to walk your sisters out to the car, and you make certain, and take Bear with you. Bear was our guard dog. Bear did all the real work. But Maddie, you'd see him, and he'd stand up straight, and he'd walk out to the front yard with the girls because Dad wasn't there. Because the girls always got walked out to the car by me and made certain that they got in the car and drove off before you came in. I didn't care how bad it was, cold it was, or anything. You're training your children to think through these things. And the devil then is the details when we talk about courtship, that it's not just a single method. There's different ways you can keep the biblical standards. But remember that sin makes everything messy, and then add to that culture and tradition. That also makes things messy. And so the Bible, if you treat it and approach it well, it will help straighten a lot of that out. Now, this is where the parents, this is where the parents then step into the picture. And so I'll just begin this and make a mark. The problem with dating, I'm going to make the argument. The problem with dating has got very little to do with the guy and the girl dating, and has everything to do with where are the parents. And where are they? Nowhere. They're on the sideline. They're not to be found, especially with the daughter. And that's the problem with it. And when you look at the biblical imagery of where and how a male versus a female is a function in society, that's not proper or true. And so what I want to argue for here over the next couple weeks is that mom and dad, but especially dad, but sometimes you don't have a dad. Again, sin messes things up, that they need to be brought back in, and the job into that picture. And the only way that will happen is if the man becomes a man. And so for all of you, if you have young daughters, like Joseph, you got it easy. You got 2 boys. They get to go hunting for a girl, all right? And you've raised up 2 fine sons. But Tom, you got 4 daughters, and they're all pretty. So you're already doomed, you know. And so you've got to be able to be there and part of that. And you've got to be ready to help them think through, especially when they decided they truly have met the magical man. Oh, goodness. Wait until that happens to you. And they're just like, oh, Dad, he's just... And I'm like, go to your room and think about that. But what do you think? What do you think? Would he be a good fit? No. No, he wouldn't at all. I've already told him no. I hate to break that to you. Tears. Oh, how come? Why would you do it? And you're like, I'm not telling you why I did it. I'm just telling you I did it. And so that's a preview of things to come. All right? So we're going to try to reinsert mom and dad, definitely dad, on the female side. The father of the young man has a different role, and we'll talk about that biblically over the next couple weeks. Let's pray. So help us, Father, to think about these things right now, Father, for every single man in this room who's a father. If he has not been diligent in this, let him repent and start to own up to his responsibilities. Let them not just enjoy the beauty of that little girl that they hold in their arms, but also realize that they have a heavy, heavy task in their before you and before man. I pray for the young ladies that they might delight in seeing a father who delights in them and wants the best, and that they would all help, the Father would help them toward that. Right now, Lord, though, we just need to go home. Many of us need rest, and so we ask for that. We ask in your Son's name. Amen. And you're dismissed. Thank you.